Here's a question that I hope I can help solve for you. If you're deciding on a retro handheld, do you want to go horizontal? Would you like to go vertical? On a vertical, I'm sorry. It's luckily a question I think has a really easy solution. You just really want to think to yourself, well, what did you grow up with? What was your first handheld? What was your first console controller? Did you grow up with the gaming at all even? Maybe you decided that like, I want to get into it because I played it on a smartphone and now I want a physical button. I don't know. But considering games are, I guess, technically physical, like you use your hands for an extended period of time, they're all really easy questions to answer. I will give you my example. I grew up with like a lot of, like, it sounds generic, but just a lot of Mario Brothers. That's all we had. Like my pops and my uncles with their Nintendo, later on the Super Nintendo. So I just have like this built-in, like just delightfully devilish Seymour built muscle memory when it comes to platformers. So a lot of the controllers, if you look at the, the classic Nintendo and Super Nintendo stuff, they are very just like horizontal, rectangular. You got to make sure the D-pad is really good, that the buttons are real responsive. The shoulder buttons, I like them up top. And even when I got my first handheld, a lot of my friends, it's funny, they had horizontal like Game Boy Colors and stuff, and my first one was the Game Boy Advance. So it's funny, like it's almost like the shorter version of what I ended up getting now. So because even my first handheld was like in a similar form, it just further dug in that muscle memory of mine. Because I also wanted to get into a little bit of 3D gaming with my retro handheld, because that's cool that I can take those on the go. I actually was also a PlayStation kid growing up. So I do also place importance on the analog sticks being pretty decent, as well as where they're located. On a PlayStation controller, for example, it's cool. I know this isn't a PS controller, but bear with me, that you can easily hop your thumbs back and forth between the two, and it's really comfortable to do so. Because with a handheld, you'll probably be holding it for like, extended periods of times. You want to make sure you're comfortable when you're hopping around the buttons and stuff. I didn't go with, for example, a vertical, because I noticed with a lot of vertical, if you do want those analog sticks, you do plan on playing those games, they tend to be not only on the chunkier side, because they have to fit, all like the parts and stuff for the analog sticks into the console, but they tend to put the shoulder buttons behind the rectangle. So you got to kind of do like this like pistol grip thing almost. I don't know what that was, which I think I actually could get used to, I'm sure. But personally, I decided that like, okay, well, if I can help avoid that, I'm kind of down to just like go with the horizontal instead. Which, speaking of, the other thing you should consider is also, well, what type of games do you want to play? So if I did end up going with the horizontal, because I kind of do actually really like how they look, I honestly would probably get one without sticks, which means that you lose access to games where you either like are they required, you need analog sticks to play them, or it just would be too uncomfortable to not play them with. So you do lose access to certain PlayStation games, for example. But I'm sure on like a console without those like analog sticks, you could probably play certain PlayStation games where you don't need them, like Mega Man games or RPGs and stuff like that. But for me, like the 3D games, that same form factor, it's kind of similar to a controller when it's like laid out in a like horizontal way. So it's actually really comfortable for me to keep gaming like in 3D also with that like layout. Heck, again, maybe you didn't grow up with like physical buttons and you grew up gaming on an iPhone, which in that case, maybe honestly straight up a vertical could be more comfortable, just because it's a kind of one-to-one thing almost. And the last thing I think I want to bring up is just, well, what about the resolution, like the size of the screen? So games will like translate differently depending on the quality of the screen. Some games might look a little bit more, squashed and stretched out on this if you don't decide to do what's called overlays. So to keep the game at its original resolution, you'll see like these little borders and stuff on the side. So if that bugs you, you may want to consider a screen that's more square in size. But maybe, again, even game selection comes into play here, because let's say you want to play a lot of Nintendo DS games, which, I mean, your best option probably is just to get straight up a DS. They're not that expensive and you can find plenty of them used. You need that stylus too, big dog. But if you decide you want to do this on a retro handheld, on a horizontal, it may be pretty impossible for most games, because now you're going to have to share two screens onto one. Even if you do like the little, like I'm going to overlay the second screen in a tiny window on a like horizontal, or just a console that has a more square screen, it may be a little bit too squashed for you to really enjoy. On the contrary, maybe you might find a vertical with a super long screen going down, and then that might be able to separate the two screens in a cool way. I've seen some people use the Trimui in an interesting way, where like they will set it up in that sense, and then the bottom joystick with the buttons becomes like the whole DS layout. It's real interesting. But overall, I hope I gave you some things to consider if you're still deciding for the shape of your handheld. Hell, maybe you want to go with the clamshell if you want to keep that DS example going. So I will admit, I think personally, I think verticals do have a little bit more res. Like, it looks cooler pulling out like a Game Boy Color shaped type of console out of your pocket. Not that this doesn't fit in your pocket, it's pretty pocketable. But you know what? Maybe you decide that I'm just gonna play everything. Actually, I'm just gonna go get a big ass Steam Deck. I don't know. But this is the stuff that I thought about when I was deciding between the two main form factors. Well, what did I want? In any case, let me know down in the comments, well, what did you end up going with and why? Was one better than the other? Do you regret it? Did you play games growing up? Did you not? Are you happy with your purchase? Will you get a big ass Steam Deck, or maybe one of those consoles where it looks like an old Sidekick phone because the screen rotates? I don't know. Feel free to subscribe for more videos about retro gaming. Having a blast doing these. And let me know if there's any other topics you'd like to know more about when it comes to this stuff. But let's have a discussion. Other than that, I will talk to you guys in the next video.